Welcome back, everyone, to Sip and Talk. Great to have you with us again.
Hey there. Yeah, good to be back. Lots happen in the world as always.
Definitely. And today we're really zeroing in on Taiwan. There's some fascinating stuff going on that's got a lot of people talking, especially, the younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to try and unpack some really interesting and sometimes quite sticky situations.
Yeah, that's the plan. Our mission today, if you will, is to dive into three big questions that really get to the heart of Taiwan's democratic journey. But we'll be looking at it through more of an international lens, trying to stay objective.
Okay, so what are the big three?
Well, first, those swirling claims around Wen-je's legal troubles. Is it political persecution or just the legal system doing its thing?
Right.
Second, this kind of paradox. Why are young Taiwanese so strongly anti-CCP, but also super frustrated with their own government? And could that frustration maybe be playing into bigger geopolitical games, even unintentionally?
Interesting angle. And the third?
And third, what actually happened with that big 726 recall attempt? It failed, but what does that failure really mean for Taiwan's future?
Got it. Okay, so we're here to help you, our listeners, connect those dots, lay out the facts as we understand them, and maybe have a little bit of fun doing it. Sound good?
Sounds great. Let's jump in.
All right, let's start with Wen-je. For anyone needing a quick refresher, he leads the Taiwan People's Party, the TPP. He was a pretty significant player in the 2024 presidential election, pulled in about, 26% of the vote?
Yeah, that's right. A significant third force. And the core issue here is this corruption indictment from back in December 2024. It's linked to a development project when he's mayor of Taipei.
And right away, things got heated, didn't they?
Oh, immediately. TPP supporters basically cried political persecution. They framed it as, the government going after him because he's opposition, especially after the election. Saw reports on this, like the South China Morning Post covered the protest back in September 2024.
But the government side, the DPP and the courts, they pushed back hard.
Firmly. They insisted it was purely a legal matter, totally separate from politics.
So when co-supporters talk about persecution, what are the specifics? What are they pointing to?
Well, a really key moment was July 21st, 2025. The Taiwan High Court decided to extend Ko's detention. Okay?
Right.
And the TPP jumped on that. Their argument is basically twofold. One, they call it indefinite detention, saying there's no substantial evidence to justify holding him repeatedly. They feel it violates basic human rights principles like proportionality. It's just dragging on and on.
It kind of reminds me of, when you're watching a TV show and they just keep extending the season, but there's no clear end date, and the main character feels like they're being kept around unfairly, maybe just for ratings or something.
Exactly. That's a good analogy. And the second part of their argument is the timing. They see it as clear post-election retaliation, a kind of political vendetta aimed at weakening the TPP after their strong showing in 2024.
And they're comparing Taiwan's system to others.
Yeah, they point to international standards, particularly in Europe, arguing that many other democracies have much stricter limits on pretrial detention, usually favoring bail with, tight restrictions over just holding someone for months on end.
Okay, so that's the TPP's side. What about the legal counter-arguments? What does the judiciary say, and what does Taiwanese law actually permit?
Right. The judiciary stance, as reported by places like Focus Taiwan back in July 2025, is that detention isn't arbitrary. It requires meeting specific legal criteria, things like a risk of the suspect colluding with others, fleeing the country, or maybe committing the crime again.
So it's not indefinite, they'd argue.
No, they frame it as a periodic extension mechanism that's built into the law. And on the no evidence claim, well, legal critics point out that you can't really get an indictment, let alone court-approved extensions, if there's zero evidence presented. They argue that political talk isn't the same as a legal conclusion reached by a judge reviewing materials.
That makes sense. So just to be clear for everyone listening, how long can someone legally be detained in Taiwan under this system? Is indefinite actually possible?
No, indefinite isn't really accurate. The system does have limits, though they can seem long. For serious crimes, like the ones Kofi is accused of, which carry sentences over 10 years, the law allows for extensions as the case moves through the courts.
How does that work exactly?
Okay, so during the investigation phase, detention is max 2 months, extendable maybe to 4. Then, once indicted, at each court level, say, the first instance court, then the high court on appeal, they can grant extensions, usually 2 months at a time, up to 6 times per level. So you could theoretically reach like 15 months per court level. But, and this is a crucial point that came in with the reforms around 2020. The total time someone can be detained throughout the entire process, including appeals and potential retrials, cannot exceed 5 years. So there's an ultimate cap. And systems like this, well, they exist in other democracies too, especially for complex cases like major corruption or national security, trying to balance rights with making sure the trial can actually happen.
How has the international media been covering all this? Are they taking sides?
Generally, no. They've tried to stay pretty neutral. Outlets like Focus Taiwan, which is CNA's English service, reported the facts, the detention was extended, the TPP made these claims, but they also presented the court's reasoning. SCMP framed it more as a crisis of trust for Taiwan's system, and they clearly labeled the political persecution angle as the TPP's narrative, not necessarily an objective fact.
So looking ahead, what are the potential outcomes or implications here? What happens next?
Well, if the detention keeps getting extended, you might see more legal scholars or human rights groups getting involved, pushing for more transparency. That could shift the whole debate away from just party politics towards, procedural justice issues.
And the eventual verdict?
Huge implications either way. If Coxie is found innocent, it massively bolsters the political persecution narrative. That could really help the TPP in the next elections, say 2026 or 2028. But if he's found guilty, it could seriously damage the TPP's whole brand, which is built on being cleaner than the traditional parties.
So internationally, people are probably watching this closely with mixed feelings.
Exactly. Some see potential political motivations. Others see it as Taiwan needing to tackle corruption seriously, regardless of who's involved, is a real test case.
This whole situation, this internal fight, really feeds into the next thing we wanted to talk about, this feeling among Taiwan's youth. It's this weird mix, isn't it? They seem super anti-CCP, really wary of Beijing.
Fiercely anti-CCP, yeah.
But at the same time, they're incredibly frustrated with their own government, particularly the DPP. How does that work?
It is a fascinating paradox. And the anti-CCP stance makes total sense when you think about it. Young Taiwanese grew up with constant military threats, diplomatic isolation tactics from Beijing. They saw what happened in Hong Kong. They hear about Xinjiang. It really reinforces this deep distrust of authoritarianism compared to the freedoms they value.
Plus, their own identity is a big factor, right?
Absolutely. Many strongly identify simply as Taiwanese, and they completely reject the one country, two systems idea Beijing pushes. And, they have access to global news. They see reports about CCP influence operations, economic pressure. It all adds up.
Okay, so the anti-Beijing sentiment is solid. Why the frustration with the DPP then? Weren't they seen as the party standing up to Beijing?
They are, but the frustration is more about domestic issues, a perceived gap between promises and reality. The DPP campaigned on progressive values, things like transitional justice, better labor rights, environmental protection. But many young people feel those promises haven't materialized.
Like what specifically?
Well, take labor conditions. Policies were talked about, but many feel their actual working lives haven't improved much. And the big ones, sky-high housing prices, especially in cities like Taipei, combined with wages that feel stagnant. You about average starting salaries around, say, NT $30,000 a month, while buying an apartment seems impossible. Or the government promising 200,000 units of social housing, but years later only having maybe 20,000 actually built. That kind of thing breeds cynicism.
So it's that feeling of being let down on the everyday stuff, the bread and butter issues.
Exactly. And there's also maybe some ideological fatigue. The slogan, "Resist China, Protect Taiwan," is powerful, but some feel it sometimes drowns out discussion about these urgent economic problems. And then you have the issue of trust. Various scandals or allegations of corruption over the years, even if not always proven or involving the current leadership directly, still chip away at the DPP's image of being the clean alternative. Think back to the Chen Shui-bian case in 2008 or more recent allegations involving figures in 2024.
Right, which leads to this really tricky, controversial question. Could some young people, in their very real frustration with the DPP, somehow end up being, unwitting accomplices to the CCP? That sounds harsh.
It does sound harsh, and it's a very delicate point. The argument isn't that they want to help Beijing, but that their disappointment creates an environment that Beijing's information campaigns can exploit. Reuters reported, for instance, how China's state media directly called the 726 recall attempt green terror, trying to frame DPP actions negatively.
So the idea is, if you're already feeling let down and angry,
you might be more receptive to messages, especially ones amplified by social media algorithms, that criticize the current government, even if those messages subtly align with Beijing's goals of undermining trust in Taiwan's democracy. The line between criticizing your own government, which is totally normal in a democracy, and unintentionally boosting an external adversary's narrative can get blurry. Some analysis in places like The Guardian and Forbes has touched on how Beijing might try to deepen existing political divides.
It's almost like, imagine you're furious with the referee in a football game for making bad calls against your team. You get so mad you start booing your own team, or maybe even half cheering when the other team scores, not because you actually like the other team, but just because you're venting frustration at the situation, at the perceived unfairness.
That's a really good way to put it. You're reacting strongly to the immediate problem without necessarily thinking through all the implications or endorsing the other side.
But we have to be careful with that accomplice label, right?
Absolutely crucial. The counter-argument is strong. Slapping that label on all youth criticism is dangerous. It risks stigmatizing legitimate democratic dissent and silencing important voices in civil society. Young people are genuinely upset about real issues, housing, wages, job prospects. That's normal democratic accountability, not necessarily proof of manipulation.
And it's not like information campaigns are only coming from one side.
Exactly. Critics point out that all political parties use emotional appeals and spin. Singling out Beijing's influence, while real, can sometimes be used politically by domestic opponents, too. It's complicated.
So how do international observers see this tension between genuine local issues and potential outside interference?
I think most credible international reporting acknowledges both things are happening simultaneously. You see outlets like Reuters, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, Forbes discussing both Taiwan's internal polarization and China's efforts to manipulate the political landscape. Taiwan is often seen as a kind of test lab for democratic resilience in the face of these pressures.
So what's the way forward then? How does Taiwan navigate this?
Well, a big part is strengthening media literacy across the board, helping people recognize disinformation, regardless of the source. More transparency in general information from the government, disclosure of political funding that helps build trust.
And for the youth movements themselves?
It probably helps if they are really clear about their fundamental principles.
Yeah.
Their democratic bottom line, you could call it.
Okay.
Explicitly stating their opposition to using force to change the status quo, rejecting one country, two systems, supporting Taiwan's self-determination. That kind of clarity makes it harder for their genuine domestic criticisms to be misconstrued or weaponized.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's pivot to that third big event, the 726 recall attempt. This was huge, right? Targeting dozens of legislators.
Yeah, historic scale. An attempt to recall 24 legislators from the KMT party, plus the Hsinchu mayor, Cao Heng-an, who's actually from the TPP. And the big news was, it failed. Every single one of them kept their seat.
Widely reported everywhere, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. Guardian, Al Jazeera, RFI, CNA, Taiwan Reporter, everyone covered it. The key was the high legal bar for recalls in Taiwan. It's not just about getting more yes votes than no votes.
Right, there's another threshold.
Exactly. The number of agree votes also has to reach at least 25% of all eligible voters in that district. That's a tough number to hit. Requires really high mobilization.
So even if more people who voted wanted the recall, if not enough people turned out overall, it still fails.
Precisely. Though, it's worth noting, The Guardian mentioned the political fight isn't totally over. There are still pushes to recall other KMT legislators ongoing.
What did analysts make of the failure? Did it send a message?
Forbes had an interesting take right after, on July 27th. They suggested it might have been a signal from voters wanting to dial back the political intensity, to maintain democratic normalcy, maybe a feeling that recall shouldn't become just another routine political weapon, even if the result kind of cemented the existing political deadlock in the legislature.
Okay, but this brings up that really contentious question again. Does keeping these KMT legislators in power mean Taiwan is somehow becoming more pro-China or aiding Beijing's agenda? What's the argument that it does?
Well, the groups pushing for the recall, often younger people with that strong anti-CCP stance, argue exactly that. They look at the KMT's platform, which generally favors more economic ties and dialogue with the mainland, and see it as creating openings for Beijing's influence, what they call united front tactics. You saw that sentiment online, posts talking about the KMT making wrong decisions or being too cozy with the neighbor.
And internationally. Any echoes of that concern?
There were some. The Washington Times, for example, speculated that the recall's failure might weaken President Lai Ching-te's position, his more explicitly anti-China, pro-U.S. stance. The idea being that a strengthened KMT in the legislature could potentially block or slow down defense spending or certain foreign policy initiatives.
Okay, but what's the other side? The argument that keeping the KMT doesn't equal being pro-China.
The KMT and their supporters push back really hard on that framing. They argue their cross-strait policy is about pragmatic engagement, about managing risk and avoiding war, not about selling out to Beijing. They painted the recall effort itself as a partisan power grab by the DPP, something that actually undermined democratic diversity.
And did voters buy that?
It seems many did. A significant number of voters, including perhaps some centrists, likely rejected the simple KMT pro-China label. They might have seen it as political overreach by the DPP. The fact that turnout was reasonably high in some areas, but the disagree votes were strong, suggests people question the motives behind the recall. And this ties back to the youth again. Even those who are anti-CCP might have been skeptical of the DPP's recall push, maybe seeing it as a distraction from those domestic issues we talked about.
Now, speaking of the legislative impact, the recall failed. The KMT and TPP kept their majority power in the legislature. And then came news about defense budget cuts. Was there a direct link?
Oh, absolutely. That legislative control maintained by the KMT and TPP directly translated into significant changes to the proposed 2025 defense budget. The original proposal was around $647 billion.
And what happened to it?
Parts of it got frozen, like 50% of the funding for the indigenous submarine program, 30% for general military operations. And the overall budget ended up being cut by about 1.3%. So instead of the planned 6.6% increase over the previous year, it was reduced to only a 5.2% increase.
That sounds like more than just trimming the edges. What are the real-world consequences?
According to Taiwan's own Ministry of National Defense, it has a severe impact. It means delays for crucial modernization efforts. Those indigenous submarines, developing drone technology, both seen as vital for asymmetric defense against the potential invasion from China. Even day-to-day stuff gets hit, like fuel for the Air Force, which is a big deal when you consider China flew aircraft into Taiwan's air defense zone over 3,000 times in 2024 alone.
Wow. How is this playing internationally, especially with allies like the U.S.?
Not well. The U.S. and others have been consistently urging Taiwan to spend more on defense, often suggesting a target of 3% of GDP or even higher. So these cuts are seen by some as a worrying sign, maybe a lack of self-defense resolve. There's concern it could affect future U.S. willingness to provide arms or support. The U.S. Senate Military Committee apparently expressed some criticism.
And how does China likely view this?
Well, China just boosted its own defense budget by 7.2%, reaching something like $230 billion USD. And they've recently been dropping mentions of peaceful unification from official statements. So from Beijing's perspective, seeing Taiwan cut its defense budget probably looks like a sign of weakness, potentially encouraging them to increase military pressure, like drills or flyovers.
So how are young Taiwanese reacting to this, the ones who are anti-CCP and generally want a strong defense?
It's definitely fueling more frustration. They want robust defense, so seeing the budget get cut is deeply disappointing. Some direct their anger at the KMT and TPP for, as they see it, hindering defense. Others are frustrated with the DPP, the ruling party, for not being able to manage the legislature effectively enough to prevent these cuts. You see a lot of this frustration bubbling up online.
Okay, so let's try to pull all these threads together. We have the Wen-je case shaking trust in the justice system, or at least perceptions of it. We have youth deeply wary of China, but also disillusioned with the DPP over domestic failings. We have the KMT facing pro-China accusations, but surviving the recall, and then overseeing defense cuts. It really paints a picture of widespread mistrust, doesn't it? Why does this feeling of having no one to trust seem so strong right now?
It really does feel like a perfect storm for disillusionment. You've got the DPP on one side facing these lingering corruption allegations people talk about, a black gold complex, this idea of dirty money in politics, maybe around things like green energy projects. Plus, the unfulfilled promises on housing and wages we discussed. It makes their core message of resist China, protect Taiwan, feel less convincing to some when daily life isn't improving.
A gap between the big national narrative and personal reality.
Exactly. Then on the other side, you have the KMT and the TPP. Their image, fairly or unfairly, is tainted with being potentially pro-China in the eyes of many young people, freezing defense funds, using language like cross-strait family. That clashes directly with the strong anti-CCP sentiment.
And the whole system just feels broken.
To many, yes. It feels like constant political mudslinging, echoes of historical black gold politics, and a sense that none of the parties are really tackling the fundamental problems head-on. So the result, especially for younger generations, remember that survey showing only 20% trust political parties, is this deep feeling of disillusionment, this sense that maybe no one truly cares about Taiwan's future.
That's a pretty bleak feeling. If you're a young person there feeling that way, how does Taiwan even begin to move forward? What are some, concrete steps?
Yeah, that can't make it work feeling is real. But it doesn't have to be the end of the story. There are definitely concrete pathways. First off, clearly, is strengthening defense and international ties. That means finding a way to ensure a stable, sufficient defense budget, maybe aiming for that 3% of GDP target. Prioritizing those key indigenous programs like submarines and drones, making sure U.S. arms sales go through smoothly. Critically, the political parties need to stop using national defense as a football in their political games.
And involving citizens more.
Yes. Engaging citizens more directly in defense could help too. Things like better reservist training, maybe promoting cyber defense skills. And on the international front, keep deepening ties with democratic partners U.S., Japan, Australia, and pushing for inclusion in international groups like the CPTPP Trade Pact. And don't forget chip diplomacy. Taiwan's dominance in semiconductors, with TSMC holding over half the global market, is a huge strategic asset they can leverage for security.
Okay, defense and diplomacy. What about those economic issues driving the youth frustration?
That's absolutely critical. Economic transformation. Tackling high housing prices has to be a priority. Seriously expanding social housing from its current tiny fraction, like 0.2% compared to Singapore's 80%, and maybe using taxes to curb speculation. Then, boosting wages and creating better jobs means focusing investment on high-value industries, AI, green tech, and shifting away from just relying on low-wage manufacturing. Supporting education and making it easier for startups to thrive is part of that too.
And fixing the political system itself, rebuilding that lost trust.
That's maybe the hardest part, but essential. Political reform and transparency. Parties have to deal with corruption scandals openly, whether it's the DPP's issues or the TPP's Kahongan case. Cleaning up old party assets, like the KMT has been pressured to do. Strengthening those sunshine laws to make government dealings more transparent. And somehow finding ways for cross-party cooperation on the big issues, like livelihood and defense, instead of constant ideological warfare. Plus, maybe encouraging new political forces, supporting youth getting involved in local politics to bring in fresh perspectives.
And finally, what about healing the divides in society?
Rebuilding social unity is key. That means bridging geographical gaps. Maybe investing more in the central and southern parts of the island, in rural areas, not just focusing on Taipei. Creating dialogues across generations on tough issues like climate change or gender equality. And underpinning all of it is civic education, boosting media literacy so people can better spot propaganda, and encouraging engagement in local communities.
Yep.
That builds resilience from the bottom up.
It sounds like a monumental task, really, but listening to you lay it out, it keeps coming back to the energy of Taiwan's youth, doesn't it? Their passion, even their frustration, seems like a powerful force.
It absolutely is. That combination of being fiercely anti-authoritarian and demanding fairness and better governance domestically, that's Taiwan's hope. In many ways, their critical thinking is a huge asset.
So maybe the message for you, our listener, whether you're in Taiwan or just watching from afar, is not to get overwhelmed by the complexity. Think about how you can shift from just being a complainer about problems to being a co-creator of solutions, even in small ways. Continuous participation really does add up.
Yeah, and maybe a final thought to chew on. Sometimes we feel helpless when facing huge problems. But maybe the opposite of helplessness isn't just blind optimism. Maybe it's designing the future. If you start looking at social or political problems like design challenges, it shifts your mindset. You move beyond just pointing out what's wrong and start thinking constructively about how to build something better, step by step.
That's a great way to frame it. Well, this was definitely a deep dive into some complex issues in Taiwan today. Thanks for walking us through it all.
My pleasure. It's definitely a challenging picture, but like we said, the energy and the critical thinking, especially from the younger generation, are really inspiring. They're a path forward for sure.
And helping you make sense of complex world events, one thoughtful conversation at a time, that's what we aim for here on Sip and Talk.
Absolutely. So don't forget to subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you get your podcasts. We really appreciate you tuning in.
Oh, and before we go, definitely check out our good friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickytolife. He's got awesome stuff, memes, music, wine tasting, travel vlogs, really fun content. You won't regret it.
Good stuff there. And just a quick heads up for all of you loyal listeners starting soon, Sip and Talk will be shifting from daily episodes to weekly ones. We're so grateful for all your amazing support as we make this transition.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. We'll catch you next time on Sip and Talk.